Welcome, everyone, to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Welcome to the show. Hope you're staying well. Hope you're staying safe. On today's show, we have a wonderful musician. If you're familiar with Amos The Transparent, Silent Winters, the Andy Kaufmans, or you've had a chance to listen to his new album, Jonathan Chandler and the Bandwagoneers, Jonathan, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Oh, good, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, that is a long list of bands that you've been a part of. What brought you to releasing the Bandwagoneers album?
I know I'm very lucky that I have a musical family that surrounds me. And you know what's neat about each group is it seems that they almost rotate when groups want to be able to do things. So I'm constantly staying busy, which is great. But the solo record really came about with this whole quarantine thing. Everybody is able to record from home, but when I started digging through old books and everything and writing these tunes, everybody I think was just kind of settling in and doing their own thing, and I had the itch to make some tunes, and I just kind of went with it. Everything was done aside from the drum story, which was done at Peter's house. Everything was done here, so it was super easy to say, well, you know, I'm not allowed to go anywhere tonight, or I'm not allowed to go anywhere for the next week, so I'm just going to go back down to the basement and tinker with these tunes. And I think when I started doing them, probably in my mind I had decided, you know, these are probably just going to be demos, and we'll see which band that they go to and where they end up. But the more I was able to tinker and, you know, delete parts and completely rearrange parts and start from scratch, just because I had time, kind of grew to didn't think that they were too bad.
No, they sounded great. They absolutely do. If you do have a chance, fellow, our good listeners here, have a chance to hop onto Spotify, have a listen to it. When it comes to the actual writing process, how does it differ when you're writing for Amos the Transparent or the Andy Kaufmans, or for your own solo stuff?
Yeah, I think when I start tinkering with something, I think I know right away if it's going to be more of a complex arrangement, or, you know, if I'm just feeling a little more endeavorous, it might be something that is going to be geared towards Amos. Because I mean, that the band's been around for 13 years. We all know how each other play, and it's kind of easy just to say, hey, let's try this, or bring something to the table and say, well, how would you guys do this? Let's completely switch it around. Whereas like the Silent Winters, it's so melody driven, and Olenko writes so much of that stuff too, that I just get the luxury of saying, oh, that's awesome. Let me fiddle around and play it my way. But it's so melody driven that it doesn't really, not to say it doesn't matter what's happening with the arrangement, but it's not about that, right? It's about what the voices are doing. And the Andy Kaufmans, a couple of years ago, I co-ran a recording studio here in Ottawa, and during really slow mornings, my partner Brian and I, we had this thing where I'd show up about half an hour before him every day. It was just like the daily schedule that kind of worked out. So I'd see how much I could write in 30 minutes. And then when he got there, if we had about an hour and a half or so before the client was going to show up, how much could we record in that hour and a half? And then I think the rule of thumb was like, we couldn't spend more than 2.5 hours on a song. And they always came out so quirky. Even writing most of the lyrics, it was us just saying, well, I heard this story, or, you know, this happened to me last week, and we totally blow it out of context over a couple of beers and just like make it a super fun thing, you know? So the Andy's, yeah, that's kind of like its own, you're going to be in its own mind frame to do that kind of thing, I think.
I think one of the things that really stands out about basically all of the music that you put out there is just like the layering of the vocal harmonies. What is it when you're writing a song that, do you hear those harmonies in your head as you're writing it? Or is it one of those things where, you know, you bring the structure to the group or to the project and discover the harmonies kind of on the fly?
I've always been a big fan of exploring that, because, I mean, really when you break down popular music anyways, you're really looking at a 1, 3, and a 5 in every chord in some shape or another, and there's a melody that can navigate the main melody, underneath it. So it's always kind of fun to layer that and explore and see. And every time you add a new one or find a new melody that works, it kind of drastically changes that part of the arrangement, right? For better or for worse. I mean, mute buttons are very easy to find. But yeah, I think the layering, when we started the Amos band, Broken Social Scene was just kind of coming out, right? They had You Forgot It in People, and Chris, my Amos co-founder, I guess is the word. He was huge into anything that they would do. So like that was a big gear saying, cool, well, let's layer this, let's try this sound. So naturally we were making this record and it was kind of just the two of us and the engineer, Jason. And then we had to figure out how to reproduce that live, which ended up being, well, let's put together a 9-piece band in order to cover the parts. So the layering kind of just came naturally in that context. And it wasn't until, 2000, I could be completely off here, but 2015 or so when Olenka joined the group. Such a natural talent for finding harmony, like no one I've ever met or that had the privilege of singing with. Whereas there'd be any melody and she would just sing something over top of it that just fit. And that was kind of the basis for starting the whole Silent Winters thing, is saying, well, what if we take this big thing and strip it down? We ended up doing a bunch of like Amos acoustic gigs that people couldn't come out to, or just promo spots here and there. And it ended up being Olenka, Mike, the cellist, and I. And we started kind of tinkering with the idea then and saying, this is drastically different. And it is kind of interesting to go out to do these promo gigs. And we're almost rearranging the songs in a way that they're unrecognizable as what Amos is supposed to be, or that, that live show or the record is. So that's kind of where the whole Silent Winters thing started. And then, Olenka wanted to do her own album. And I was running the studio at the time, and she said, will you record it? And I said, well, only if I can sing on it. So I forced my way into her band, is what I did.
I do have to ask, because this has been a year kind of like no other, where bands are performing, music is being created, then all of a sudden you kind of have to put the straight up the parking brake on. You couldn't just ease into it. The parking brake just got pulled and you started to do donuts in the car, and it's just a massive wreck. How has this last year been for you? Are you feeling the itch to want to get back out there?
It's a great question. And, the answer I truly feel guilty about. And I don't know if I do. We'd been at it for so long. And, the theater shows, the festival shows, and all, like, they're so glamorous. And like, they're kind of like what you live for and what you want to go and do all the time. But all the little club shows, and not that I wasn't thankful, I do not want to come across as ungrateful for any of my experiences. But the late nights in the van, we're not 20 anymore, I guess is what I'm saying. And we were toying with the idea of, making some more tunes and releasing some more stuff. And with that comes shows and traveling. And I don't know. I obviously wish that a break came under different circumstances, but I've kind of welcomed the whole, it's allowed me to be home a little bit more with my family. I think my daughter's a fan of having me around. So, but yeah, who knows what it's like going forward.
Now, you have actually done a show with all the kind of the measures in place. Was it Neat in Burnstown with the plexiglass in front of you and musicians wearing masks? How was that experience? And did you feel was it cathartic to get it back up on stage at that point, or was it more anxiety inducing, knowing that it was kind of in the middle of waves and you didn't really know what to expect?
Both. It felt so great to be back up on stage, and like even just rehearsing with the guys, we hadn't seen each other in so long, right? So to get back together and like trying to figure out how to ride the bike again, right? And we've grown so close as a group. But at the same time, I'm not going to lie, we all left the gig going, that was awesome fun, but I think it was too soon. You know what I mean? And I understand the measures because I mean, I saw it. We were in a venue. There was some distance, you know, people were minding it at the beginning, but the more beers people had, you know, the masks came down a little bit, people got a little bit closer. And I don't know, again, like we had super fun, and I love Neat. We all love Neat. It's such a great venue to play. But yeah, I think we all kind of left and said, we'll see, you know, we'll touch base again when everything's safe and when, you know, everything's going. I'm surprised actually that I'm seeing, you know, like the festivals popping up and, you know, people booking tours, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I won't be rushing out to any shows, I'll tell you that. But
it is a bit of a weird feeling because as much as I do want to kind of get back out there, I know personally, you know, we're recording this interview on the May 24 weekend, and normally this is the weekend that, you know, that my wife and I would kind of go out, and there's a festival in Columbus, Ohio, we would always go down to, and as much as we're seeing, you know, the Facebook memories, it's like, oh, we were here this year and we were here this year, and it's like it's a bit anxiety inducing, just the thought of going to a show with that many people. But one of the things that has kind of come up in this past year has been the prevalence, or at least the introduction of virtual concerts. And you did one with the Silent Winters back in December. How is that experience, and do you see that model continuing forward past COVID?
Oh, do I see it continuing? I don't know how to answer that. It's very strange. Like I've attended a couple as well, and it's very strange watching a show in that manner where you're kind of paying attention depending on who it is or the tune, but it's very easy to, you know, swipe out or something like that. In terms of playing, like I did do the one, we did our Christmas show. We filmed one for the Dragon Boat Festival here as well. Amos filmed some too. To be honest, they're super weird. Like it's kind of the opposite high that you get from playing a live show, right? Because I mean, the second you end the tune, it's just silence. You know, you're used to at least hearing some glass, you know, some ice in a glass, or somebody coughing or something like that. But yeah, no, to have complete silence, and then Silent Winters is so. I'm completely drawing a blank. Like the stage banter is such a thing. You know, we communicate with the audience, we go back and forth, and to have none of that. Mm-hmm. Which again, like Olenka's so good at that. She's a million times a better front person than, you know, I could ever dream of aspiring being. And to be kind of beside her, going with her struggling, you know, where's the audience that I can banter back and with? I kind of laughed at her a little bit selfishly. But yeah, strange.
It has to be tough too, especially when you're in, you know, when you're in a live environment. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, it has to be good. It has to be, you know, on the spot. And if you make a mistake, you keep going through. Do you find, or did you find during the recording processes, you know, you were almost uber critically listening to yourself, and did you have to fight an urge if you felt like, well, you know, maybe, maybe I could have played this a little bit tighter or whatever, you know, like, is there that urge to want to do a retake?
I force myself not to do that with the live things for that exact reason. Once you open that box, I mean, there's no stopping. You know, why don't we just change this and trigger this? And then it just becomes not live at all. The Amos band, we did some live recordings again years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And it ended up doing that, saying, well, let's redo the bass just because, or let's redo the acoustic because there's a bit of bleed in it or something like that. Well, while we're at it, Dan wouldn't mind touching up his solo. And then it ended up being like the whole thing was completely redone, which truly is like, that's a live album, really. It's all redone anyways. But I think for these, they're a little different. People in the last year, I feel we're a little more forgiving. They know somebody's playing in Zoom, all over Zoom, and they're completely out of their comfort zone. And majority of musicians around the world are trying to figure out how this interface connects to their computer, and like, what does this button do? The audience has to be a little forgiving at that point. But yeah, I mixed and edited the video for one Silent Winters thing we did for that festival there. And yeah, I definitely had to try to turn off that part of my brain saying, let it go. Because the second you get video too, I mean, that's a whole other thing, trying to sync it up afterwards. And, yeah.
Now you mentioned, doing the mixing and all that. And aside from all the, the bands and the albums that you have put out, you're also a producer and a mixer. You've done work with, Bitter North, with Maeve Delia, with the Night Moves, with a bunch of different artists. When it comes to approaching a project like that, how much do you have your musician hat on, and how much do you just approach it as, as a producer?
I used to try to have my musician hat on all the time, and saying, let's go about this a different way. And I'm hearing your song this way. And some artists are great with it and they super welcome it. But I learned, not in a bad way, but I learned that, you kind of have to turn that off because it's not my record. I truly enjoy making music in any aspect, but every record isn't my record. Although a bunch of tunes that I've recorded, I always say to the artist, I wish I wrote this song. It's so good. It's not my tune. It's not my face going on it. It's not my name on it. And that became kind of a thing when we had the studio and we say, it's not our face on the record. So you kind of have to make the decision. And then some bands are super hard to work with because they don't want your opinion at all, right? And I don't know if I function well in that situation. Whereas I think I just kind of turn off and say, all right, record your record. Those ones aren't fun. Those aren't the fun records. But
Of the ones that you have worked on that you haven't been a musician on or haven't been a songwriter on, is there one that stands out where you just sit there and really enjoyed the entire recording process?
Yeah. Oh, the first one. There's been a couple for sure. The first one that comes to mind is Mountain Eyes. Mountain Eyes is his name's Steve Gravel. He's a local musician here, and he just has such a presence and such a voice on him. And he came into the studio and you could tell he was all nervous or like, can we hear a tune? And then he started singing and it was like jaw down to the ground. And he was super experimental, wanting to like scratch the barn board on the wall for like a hi-hat sound, which sounds like it could be a lot of fun or super tedious. But I'm really happy with a lot of those tunes. He's such a great songwriter. Another one that comes to mind is there's an artist named Talk who's now hanging out. He's in, I think, back and forth between Toronto and LA. I don't know where Nick is, but we did a bunch of tunes and he never released them. But I still think those are some of the greatest tunes too that come out of that realm. But when
you're kind of in that producer role, because you've produced some of your own stuff as well, do you find it harder to produce your own stuff as opposed to producing somebody else?
No, I don't have to be polite when I'm producing my own stuff. If that makes any sense. My own record, like the Wagoneers record, I know I've made the joke a couple of times now, but I could truly forgivably mute and delete whatever I wanted. And I mean, it was me playing it. So it's not like as an Amos thing or something. If Dan sends a guitar part or plays something, it's probably brilliant and works. But I almost feel a little guilty sometimes saying, what if we try it like this? Because it's an outlet for everybody. Whereas my own record, I wasn't hurting anybody's feelings. I wasn't wasting anyone's time. I was just kind of experimenting. And that's what a lot of it became. The whole thing started, my buddy Peter Von Althen was setting up a home studio at the beginning of this whole thing, as most musicians were, sorry. And I was kind of helping him out, setting up his rig, just setting up the computer a little bit. And he's like, well, I need something to practice with now. So I sent him the ghost tracks for When You're Right, You're Right, which I had been, in all honesty, demoing for Amos. And then he played to it and he sent it back. And I was like, well, shit, like I got to use this because damn, that's not like it was different than I had heard it. The drums sounded good. They were played so well. I'm like, yeah, I got to do this. And that's really why the whole record happened. It's like Peter needed something to practice with. So I would send him a ghost track and think, he's probably going to play something like this. I could hear the song going like this. Because when you start, you hear a little bit of it in your head. And then he'd send a track back and it'd be completely different. So the arrangement that was in my head would get completely flipped around, or, like the bass is going to go like this. And then I play a different bass part over what he had played. I'm like, well, that jives a lot better, which completely changes what the guitars are doing, so it was a lot of fun. And again, I could forgive myself for deleting a whole bunch of stuff.
Now, coming from the Ottawa area, there has been like a ton of phenomenal talent, musicians and bands and the like that have come out of the Ottawa area. As it stands now, how would you describe the music scene in talking about Ottawa? And I come from Ottawa, so I can safely say that when John Oliver was calling basically making fun of Ottawa for being like the most boring town out there, he's not wrong. but the music scene has always been so thriving, even if not everyone has heard it. But how would you describe the Ottawa music scene right now?
It's definitely a very strange thing because you're right. The scene is thriving. There's great bands in the city. There's always been great bands in the city. But for some reason, like you've always had to leave the city if you want to do something, because we've never been a hub. Bands stop in. If you're super lucky, one of the promoters would give you an opening slot for one of the other bands. And then eventually maybe you'd start building a draw and that would turn into stuff, but nothing ever. I mean, I'd like to say I'm wrong, and we can probably say, well, here's 7 examples that'll prove you wrong. But it was never really a scene like that. It was never a make or break scene. The funny thing about it is it's got such a huge community in the cover world, and maybe it's because there's so many bars and so many Irish bars, especially down in the market, and every one of them, not now obviously, but had a band playing for 4 or 5 hours a night. And it was like a constant rotation of the same guys, and everybody knew everybody there. So that was an interesting thing. And it's a strange town where you can, people will pay $10-15 to get into that bar to hear you play, Sweet Caroline. But when you're starting out, especially, to get them to pay $5 to come listen to original music for 45 minutes is like pulling teeth, because that was the great thing about Zayfods, and he had it though, because at 11 o'clock, that turned into a club. And if you weren't into that, you could still go to the other bar and see, but you could still get, people out to see your band then. So it's such a strange scene. It's home though, I guess.
So what was it that got you to, start writing songs and, to put a band together? What was the inspiration spark to get to that point?
When I was, I guess I would have been 10 or 11 years old. Aerosmith put out Get a Grip. Okay, we're just going way back there. And I'm pretty sure I haven't been able to figure it out. Maybe I dreamt the whole thing, but I think in the Living on the Edge video, there's a scene. I'm convinced that Joe Perry was like half cow, and he was on a train track, and that he was playing a solo, and it didn't make it look very hard. And I remember being like, I can do that. I want to do that. So my father had a guitar, so I used to tinker with it, and he taught me a couple chords, and that was kind of my introduction to music. And then once grade, I don't know, grade 6 or grade 7, talent shows came up, and then you meet the other guy who had a guitar, and then you start, dicking around playing Nirvana tunes in his basement. And I started singing because nobody else wanted to. I mean, a band needed a singer, and once I got the itch, man, like I had to be in a band. The band was going to be the best. We'd draw the band names all over our math books and stuff like that. So I mean, somebody had to do it, and for the love of God, like I still don't consider myself a singer, but back then I tell you, I definitely was not a singer. And then high school came about, and we met a couple other guys and started playing, and the kicker for me was I'd written a couple songs for that band. Again, they weren't any good. They probably sounded like horrible, like Trouble Charger ripoffs or something like that. But there was there was a band, and they were a couple grades older than me, and these guys were so good. Like they had a vibe, and they could all play, and they had sweet gear, and they had a CD that they were selling at the coffee houses. And one band trip, like a music band trip, I befriended the guitar player, and he became like my best buddy through high school, and he asked me if I wanted to start playing in that band, which was super cool, because for me that was like, holy shit, I'm stepping up to the big leagues. All right. And like the big leagues of 10th grade. But I learned so much with those 3 guys. I still talk to them all, absolutely adore them. The drummer of that band is Chris, who we started Amos with. So I mean, we've been playing together for over 20 years now. She's longer than that. The bass player of that band, Connor, he actually played bass on the last tune on the Bandwagoneers record. So I mean, those guys became my super friends. And that band, it's actually kind of funny. This is the small world story for you. So do you remember a bar that was around on Elgin called the Elbow Room?
I do remember. I never actually played the Elbow Room, but I do remember it.
Okay. Well, I would have been in 10th or 11th grade, and there was a battle of the bands that they were doing. Chris was older, and I think he was 18 at the time. But anyways, he had entered us, and we had gone in, and we had done all 3 rounds. And they told us that afterwards, the reason we couldn't win is because we were all underage, and they didn't want this underage band winning. But through that, the booker, he still like kind of hooked us up with some recording opportunities and stuff. Years later, that guy who booked it ended up being my studio partner, Brian Rockstill, who is the other half of Andy Kaufmans. So super small world there. But yeah, after that, they had this crazy idea because they heard of this bar called the Horseshoe Tavern. And he's like, well, we got to go play there. So Chris being Chris starts sending emails. And then all of a sudden we started, playing in Toronto and surrounding, much to like, I'm sure my parents were ecstatic at this point. Right. Yeah. And that kind of went on again. Like I said it before, I'll say it again. Like I learned so much playing with those guys. And Steve, who's the guitar player, brilliant man, and he runs an guitar effects pedal company called Empress Effects, which they make absolutely crazy stuff. again, he had the patience to like explain theory to me in a way that I would understand. And we started Amos. That was pretty much the band too, with a whole bunch of other people. But that band that I was talking about called Keep Yourself Good Company, that kind of fizzled off, university years, and people became responsible and all that shit. I just didn't.
see now I'm just curious what some of these band names were that you were writing down on notebooks. Like, just do you remember any of them that you had actually written down?
The band names? Oh, the first band in sixth grade, I think we were called the Rebels, which, I mean, that one might make a comeback. The Rebels, if that wasn't taken. Pretty Walter was a band name. I don't know where that came from. But Keep Yourself Good Company, that was it was a play, I believe, that Connor or Steve wrote, and we needed to rename the band. For some reason, we're like, well, let's use that. But yeah, sorry, when I was talking about Matt, right, scribbling on math books, it was like doing the GNR logo and all that stuff. That's what I meant by that,
When it comes to those early listening days and discovering like you mentioned, like the Get a Grip album, how important is it to really take advantage of the music that's out there and listen to it and be inspired by it? And how has your music taste changed from Aerosmith's Get a Grip and Living on the Edge to what you're writing now?
Drastically. I mean, I think at that point you're introduced to what's around you, right? So, I mean, I was listening to what my older brother would bring home, and he was also pretty influenced, as was I, about like what my dad had. My dad had like this giant CD and record collection. So, I mean, we'd spend, a night and we'd go through and we'd look at all the covers, and that was just like something we did. And he's obviously, I mean, he grew up in the 60s and the 70s. Those were his prime years, for lack of a better word. So there were all those influences, Beatles, Zeppelin, all that stuff. Those were all things that we had easily accessible. So I think there was, the guitars of the 90s and all that were super welcome to the ears. I think I went through a phase probably 10 years ago where, to be honest with you, like I wanted to stop listening to new music, which I think I missed out on a lot of things. And I don't know if it was good or bad, because to be honest with you, like mid to early 2000s, like I don't know, maybe I missed stuff, but I realized I'm like, I've never listened to all the Fleetwood Mac records. I've never listened to Supertramp all that much, right? And I was like, there's all this great music that, I knew about, but I never really soaked in or experienced. So I think doing that changed my taste drastically, and it became less about what can I do with an instrument, or what's this section going to be different than that section, and more about like creating a song, right?
One of the things that has also come up is before we all got told to stay home, people were out playing shows, right? Whatever. Now, having a year of, really analyzing what it is that inspires us and what it is that drives us, you're hearing a lot of music and a lot of things being put out there that really, truly, and honestly come from the heart. So what is it, what was that introspection, during that time of writing the Bandwagoneers album? What was it? What were some of the thoughts going into there?
The Wagoneers albums, it's strange because that a lot of those tunes started 20 years ago. When quarantine started, I was clearing out our storage, like our family storage unit, and I found this box of old, high school pictures and notebooks. And I think you're probably more creative back then too. I could be completely wrong in saying that, but like when everything's new and exciting, you're writing and, your brain's constantly going. So I found this notebook, or a couple notebooks anyhow, with all these poems and these ideas and things. Half of them more than half them like straight to the trash. Nobody's ever reading this. Let's destroy this. But that was the basis for most of these songs. And I said, well, I have time. I'm going to explore these ideas that I never really finished, which is super weird because these songs were around. I don't even know where I'm going with this. What was the inspiration for these tunes? Nothing that's happening now. I guess is the strange part. I mean, there probably would be a lick of like Silhouette as example. Like that was a new tune where I was kind of reminiscing about all these other things. But there isn't any like I'm stuck at home. I think this of the world. There's no political views or anything like that because the books that I found didn't reflect anything like that, right? And I figured it would be fun. I remember putting these things and moving them around and saying, "Well, I'm not going to throw that out because one day I'm going to use it." And then you dig it out 5 years later and you're like, I still have this thing. I should throw this. Nah, I'll just throw it back in the box. So it was the quarantine time for me, I guess, was really, the time to bring it out and say, even if it sucks, I don't have to put it out. No one's expecting anything. I don't have to go tour it. I don't have to, there's a lot of ideas that definitely didn't get, that did get shelved. Maybe I'll explore them again in 20 years. Who knows?
For anyone who's going to sit down, put the headphones on, and really soak in this new album, what takeaway do you hope that the listener has?
I've always just been of the mindset, I try to put myself in other people's shoes because if I wrote only about my thoughts all the time, to be honest with you, like we wouldn't get very far. I try to imagine scenarios from other people's perspective. And that's, I always try to teach my daughter, how is that person going to feel? How is that going to affect them? Put yourself in their shoes. And like most records that I've made, there's that underlying, and one of the greatest things of being a songwriter is the times where people do come up to you or they do write you and say that record or that song, it's like you knew, and it made me feel like I wasn't alone. That got me through whatever, this rough patch of whatever is. If there's something in it for anybody and anybody can identify with anything, again, a lot of these thoughts are thoughts that I had 20 years ago, which are kind of just fleshed out now. But if there's anything that anybody can relate to at all, then great. I think maybe I did my job in that aspect.
So it's come to the part of the podcast where we dive deep into the songs that are you. So, Jonathan Chandler, if you had to introduce yourself to a total stranger, but rather than say, "Hi, I'm John, how are you doing?" you basically hand them a mixtape. And on that mixtape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on that tape and why are they there?
That's such a crazy and great question. When I read that, I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do? So I ended up coming up with 6 tunes that I could talk about. But for me, I went more about, these are the songs that formed my musical taste, I suppose, because I mean, who am I? I'm a kid from Ottawa, West End, Ottawa, with a passion for music. Yeah, right. So the first tune that would probably be on that would probably be Fake Plastic Trees, Radiohead. Great tune. I truly think that this song changed my life. And I remember where I was when I first heard it. I was in my grandparents' den. And my mom brought me over for like a Sunday, visit or whatever. I don't know what they were doing. And I was just hanging out and Muchmusic was on. And this video came on. It was super colorful. And it was just like, oh, this is kind of neat. This is that Creep band. Anyways, I was so enthralled by what I was hearing. I don't know. I left there and I was like, holy shit, like that kind of emotion can be put in to music, and I need to know more about this. So that was definitely a defining moment and song for me. one of the greatest memories, and I was recently asked this, one of the greatest memories I have of touring and everything would probably be, I think it was '07. A couple of us did a stint in northern Quebec with Patrick Watson. And this was, I think he won the Polaris Prize the night before. So we met up wherever we were and they were all ecstatic. And I mean, it's brilliant freaking record. Great guys, great week spent out with them. But there's a tune on that record called Slip Into Your Skin. I think it's the third track. That was the first dance at my wedding. I just absolutely adore the song, and it's such a great memory. Again, great tour, great shows, great people, and being able to see the Patrick Watson band in any shape. This is 15 years ago, just the same as now. Like, what a treat that is, and to be able to see it night after night for a little while from, side stage, jokingly drinking his beer and showing him while he's on stage. Like, what a treat that was. So such a great defining time. Third tune would probably be another real banger. Again, I think I was drawn to the emotional aspect of this, but the first Jeff Buckley tune I ever heard was Lover, You Should Have Come Over. And again, just speaking about performance and truly capturing a masterpiece of a take, of a tune, of any sort of feels that a human can feel is captured in this song. It sounds fantastic. It's priceless to me, timeless. Fourth one would be kind of funny. Thinking back, first tune I ever performed live, going back to those talent shows in sixth grade, would be My Friends by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, okay. Which, not gonna lie, I'm not a big Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. I imagine a lot of people won't like hearing that, but a lot of people agree, whatever. That album, One Hot Minute, I still think it's their best record. And at this point, like, in my opinion, they're not going to top that record. Dave Navarro playing guitar on that totally transformed the band into a different band, really. And that record was phenomenal. That was one of the first tunes I learned how to play. And first tune I ever played in public. So song number 5, again, touching back, Living on the Edge. I remember watching the video and what are we in 94 Congress Center in August was my first concert, and that was Aerosmith. My father brought my brother and I to that, and that was, I just remember they had this like big cow backdrop for the intro, and then it dropped, and then they started playing Eat the Rich, and man, that was, I remember looking at my dad going like, why is everybody standing up? He's like, well, that's what people do at concerts. I was like, okay. Why is it so loud? Well, because that's, it's a rock concert that's loud. I'm like, okay. Hey, it was defining moment, defining record. Great record too, if you ask me. And finally, I'd probably put All My Lovin' by the Beatles. I grew up with the Beatles in the household all the time. My mom would sing the songs. This one always stuck out. I absolutely love the melody. It's got the strangest little chord progression that sounds so effortless, but is pretty damn complex. And when my daughter was born, I don't know why this happened, but I know why she was born. I was there for all that. When she was born, my wife was trying to get some sleep, and my daughter wouldn't let her sleep. So I'd walk up and down the halls of the hospital, and I walked for probably about 3 or 4 hours so my wife could sleep. And for some reason, what came out of my mouth was All My Lovin'. So I was walking up and down the hospital halls, just singing this to the point where like the nurses were stopping me and were like, are you okay? Like, do you need a break? Do you just sit? I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm just singing. And to me, it was like I was singing the song to my kid that my mom would sing to me, So that's just a tune that, I don't know. I'm lucky to be around. We're lucky to be around at the same time that, Paul McCartney is. But, yeah.
Twice in that list, you brought up Muchmusic. And, for anyone who is listening to the podcast right now and, either A, is not in Canada, or B, grew up with Muchmusic after they stopped playing music. How important was it to have Muchmusic, putting that music out there in a medium that really, it drew you in like right away? And do you think that we need a version of what Muchmusic was today?
Oh God. First, how important was it? I don't know if you can, I don't even know if you can actually measure that. Like, I wouldn't be playing music if it wasn't for Muchmusic, probably, because that's how I was introduced to it. That's how so many people were introduced to it. And even things like the Saturday mornings, my brother and I would get up and we'd have lists of what the countdown was that week. And then we'd be like, holy shit, man, Disarm's up to number 3 this week. So yeah, it was phenomenal. And I remember my mother making fun of us at one point because my brother would be like, have you heard or have you seen that song yet? Which, I mean, just makes zero sense. Do we need another version of Muchmusic? I would love to say yes. Even just like, man, I got all excited when you asked that question, even at the prospect. But you think of things like Snow Jam or their intimate and interactive series, like those were such huge things. And they did what was the 4 o'clock or something like that, and they'd have the local bands play sometimes.
Oh God, yeah. What was that? What it was it the Wedge? I know the Wedge played.
The Wedge was awesome because they had like all the alternative tunes. Yeah, that's where you'd hear like Sandbox and Rusty and stuff like that, right? Which was
Sandbox was killer. So underrated. So underrated.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I've gone back to now and again, just trying to reintroduce myself. There's so much music in the 90s. Like, it was great music, great musicians, putting things down to tape, vocalists not being altered with, like, fantastic musicianships. And yeah, that was all highlighted on Muchmusic. Like, everything came digital. That came with everything else, right? Like, bedroom producers, and nothing wrong with that. I made my record in my basement. There's nothing wrong with that. But the options became endless. You didn't need to go to the big spot anymore, just like how you don't need the big television station to introduce you to new things. So there's good and there's bad with it. I wish there was just, I don't know what a modern form of Muchmusic would be, but I mean, if there was some form of something like that to inspire kids the way that we were inspired, it would be phenomenal.
Well, let's hope that somewhere, somehow, someone finds a way to bring that music to the visual medium, and like, really, because that was the big thing too. It's like, you mentioned bands like Sandbox, and there were bands out of Vancouver, and if you just listen to local radio, you wouldn't necessarily hear those bands. So to have that national platform bringing those bands to you, like that, it was so important. Yeah. Jonathan, thank you so much for popping on and hopping onto the podcast here. Where can we find you on social media, and how can we listen to the new album, and what's up next for you?
Well, you can find the record anywhere you get your music, Spotify, Apple, the endless list that goes on. You can find me on all the social medias. I don't know what they are. Probably my name, Jonathan Chandler. Search me and I'll be there, except for TikTok. I haven't kind of wrapped my head around that one yet. What's next? Who knows? The Amos guys have a couple tunes in the works. Lenka's talking about making a record. There's an Andy Kaufmans tune coming out, I think, next week. In terms of my own stuff, we'll see. I was kind of thinking I might make a record with my daughter, which would be kind of fun, but who knows? Something. I'll do something, that's for sure. As much as I joke about stopping and saying, on my worst days, I say, I'm done. I'm never doing any of this again. I'll never stop.
Well, Jonathan, congratulations on the new album. It sounds phenomenal, and thank you for stopping by. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in, listening to this episode of the Made You a Mixtape podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, you can actually download this entire show on any of the audio streaming platforms and listen to it on the go. But if you're listening to us on one of those platforms, you can watch this entire interview on YouTube. Take care. Until next time, this is the Major Mixtape Podcast. I am Jason. Take care.